We'll welcome to the stage our moderator, Professor Susan Ariel Aaronson, Director of the Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub at George Washington University, with panelists Amandeep Singh Gill, Secretary General's Envoy at the United Nations for Technology, Gary Marcus, Professor at NYU and CEO of the Center for the Advancement of Trustworthy AI. And on this screen, we'll have momentarily Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences, UNESCO, and Ulrik Vestergaard Knudsen, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Thank you, Susan.
Everybody, and welcome. Since our panelists have already been introduced, although I don't see our panelists yet who are online, we're going to be talking about the role of international institutions, which is very, very important. My first question, alas, I cannot ask it since I don't see Ulrik Knudsen.
They're behind us.
Okay. Oh, she said in front. Okay. All right.
I'm here, Susan.
Okay, Ulrik, given the increased complexity of the AI value chain with foundation models and the widespread use of generative AI, how have these developments influenced the OECD's approach to AI policy and international cooperation? And thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and it's really a pleasure to join this model with some of the finest representatives of the international institutions, Gabriela Ramos and Amandeep Gill, and of course also Gary Marcus. So I think we have to realize together that with generative AI and the events over the last 12 months, humanity really is now facing a watershed moment. We need now a global, collective, multilateral effort, or at least an interoperable effort for the governance, safe development and deployment of AI. We began in my organization, the OECD, working on AI in 2016, and then in 2019, we delivered the OECD recommendation on AI and the OECD principles. They went on that same year in 2019 to become G20 principles for AI. We originally thought of that as, flexible, future-proof and values-based promotion of the use of AI in a way that's innovative and trustworthy and respecting human rights and democratic values. I think they still hold up to those standards, but we are 5 years later down the road in need of a review of that, and we will take that up next year with our partners, including our partners in this panel today. But that's probably not going to be enough. We also need to collect evidence. We need to have a community of experts. We need to recognize that AI is evolving, and we're trying to be at the forefront of that. But I'd also like to say that there is absolutely no organization that can do this alone. The UN and UNESCO, that's Amandeep and Gabriela, they have the legitimacy of representing the whole world, but also the needs of the whole world, if you like, whereas we perhaps can function more as a bridge to some of our like-minded countries which have perhaps more specific needs. And it can be confusing that you have in the global end of the spectrum, you have UN, UNESCO, you have G20, you have then also G7 that's made a lot of headway with the Hiroshima process this year. And in the middle, you have organizations like my own trying to reach out through GPA, you have the Council of Europe. But I think we need to agree that we're going to need perhaps, if not all of those institutions, then many of them. Even in my membership, even among the 38 countries of the OECD, sometimes considered a very like-minded group, there are very different approaches to the regulation of AI. We have the EU AI Act, which is a pretty heavy, comprehensive piece of legislation about to be agreed to, I think, within the next couple of months. But that's quite different from the approach taken in the US, in the UK, in Japan, some of our members. And if you then compare with China or countries from the global south, it is pretty obvious to me that we are going to need a different fora because of the different regulatory approaches, the different levels of uptake, the different ideologies. So my ambition is for all of us, the international organizations that you have invited today, but also some of the others I mentioned, to work together, respecting that we have different roles to play, but we need also to play together, because otherwise we won't get that interoperability that I think is so essential for us to tackle these existential threats. And I don't want to focus only on the threats, because there are also, immense opportunities, boundless opportunities within education, within health, within climate, but also for productivity when it comes to AI, and not least generative AI.
Thank you so much for that response. Amandeep, so do the high-level advisory body and the other initiatives by your office address the calls for a new global governance institution?
Absolutely. So it's in response to that demand signal that the advisory body has been set up. And what Ulrik just said, there is a need for an institutionalized response, and there's a need for a networked institutionalized response, so that we can respond to the many demands that rapid developments in the technology are placing on governance, whether it's related to the societal impact, the potential impact on human rights and international humanitarian law, or it is the changes to our economies that these technologies are going to bring about, changes to the labor market, and to peace and security, which again is one of the 3 pillars of the United Nations. So there are a number of reasons why we should be considering an international response, institutionalized response, and the advisory body that the Secretary General has set up is looking at the risks and challenges landscape from a comprehensive lens, not just longer-term existential risks, which might distract us from some things that are right down the road, but also some of the medium-term risks around weaponization and misuse by non-state actors, around misinformation, disinformation, the undermining of democratic discourse and societal harmony. So all kinds of risks, and also the related challenges, because risks have to be seen in the context of specific challenges of opacity. I'm sure Gary will speak to this, but independent scientists and academics don't have access into some of these developments. Even governments may be unaware of what are the capabilities that lie down the road. So we need an international effort, an independent, neutral effort that does not rely on a single company or a few companies or few countries to tell you what the capabilities are, what the likely impact is. So we need that on a regular, real-time basis every 6 to 7 months. And then we also need to have a good idea of what the opportunities are for the Sustainable Development Goals, for accelerating innovation in our economies, and what the enablers, what are the foundations, what are the resources that are needed to realize those opportunities. Because there is a risk that these developments would deepen the existing digital divide, that large parts of the global population will be left behind, or they will be lower down in the food chain in terms of their participation in the future economy. So we need to democratize these opportunities, at least those that can have an impact on the SDGs. And finally, the advisory body is going to look at the international landscape of governance. It is engaged in a mapping exercise, a gap analysis, all the initiatives that have been mentioned earlier at this conference, the G7 Hiroshima process, the excellent work that the OECD has done with its principles, but also with the practical dashboards around policy and the AI incidents monitor. So all those existing responses, the UNESCO's AI ethics framework, Gabriela will speak to that. What is it that we need now to bring these together for more interoperability, more effectiveness? But then what's the kind of institution that might be needed? What are the functionalities that need to be performed at the international levels? The question of form, whether that follows the IPCC model, IEA model, ICAO, IMO, there are a number of existing examples, but there is no clear cut and paste, no clear shift and lift into lift and shift into this domain. So we need to think about the functionalities and how they could be in a bespoke manner put together for an institution, the right institutional reform. It may not be a single institution, it may still be a network of institutions, but we need to bring them together in an inclusive setting that works for everyone.
What do you see as the key challenges in bringing it together? And will you use AI to try to find consensus?
I hope not. I think we should use humans to find consensus. The key challenges are first the speed of response, because unlike the IPCC reports, we can't wait for 6 to 7 years for scientific consensus, evidence-based analysis. We need 6 to 7 months type of updates. Then we need to do better on multi-stakeholder participation. How can we involve the private sector meaningfully, but without leading to regulatory capture? So it can't be just a few companies. They are important, they have to be there, the ones who are leading the tech development, but others, startups, SMEs, the open source side. And I think the third challenge that I'd mention here is that we need to find a way to bring the different tiers of governance together. There is the industry level response. Some may call it self-regulation, whatever. I think there's a lot of support here in this town for that kind of an approach. But there's also the national, regional regulatory response. You see that in the EU, you're seeing that in China now, Brazil. And then there is the international level. So how do these three tiers move in coordination with each other so that we are not going off in different directions and we cover all the gaps?
Thank you so much. Okay, so we've now heard from the OECD and the UN. I'd like to ask Gabriela Ramos of UNESCO. You've had enormous success with 193 nations adopting the ethics recommendations. What are the next steps for UNESCO to keep building common ground?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure always to be with these fantastic speakers. I think that we are the usual suspects. We always get together. Let me tell you that 193 countries agree on a way of handling artificial intelligence and govern artificial intelligence. Now we have 194 because the US came back to UNESCO, and one of the reasons was exactly to look at this very important piece that we produce. And I have to say that with generative AI and foundational models, the tenet of the recommendation holds even more solidly, because all of the concerns that we had before in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability, in terms of the rule of law online, 3 times grow in terms of concerns for generative AI, along with many other areas that we need to tackle. And therefore, what I would say is that the efforts that we are all doing in addressing the very specific areas should continue to do so. First, by understanding what are the risks and the challenges, the exponential nature and the exponential capacities of generative AI, of course, calls for better understanding. I would say, for example, the question of data sources. Not disclosing data sources for me is a major issue. The question of how do we adapt the regimes that we have, the labor market. We knew that jobs were going to be transformed. Now with generative is going to be even higher. The high concentration in few hands, still there. So I feel that generative AI have brought governments to get closer to what the recommendation of the ethics of AI was saying. First, doing ex-ante assessment before the developments are put in the market. Second, be clear and transparent of what happens if there is unintended consequence of harm, and how do you uphold the human rights standards, and then the red teamings that are so important. So what we're doing is, of course, introducing these elements in a better understanding, and I think that, of course, all of us are doing analysis. I'm going to launch an observatory on the ethics of AI with the Alan Turing Institute and with IITU. I'm working closely with the Amandeep. But more than anything, we have a readiness assessment tool that is measuring capacities of governments, because if we do not really strengthen the capacities of governments to deal with these technologies, the institutions that are being created, even in the more advanced economies, to understand better, the sandboxes, the regulatory systems in the EU, in the executive order in the US, need to have a very strong governance capacities, and this is exactly what we're doing. We're doing 50 diagnostics around the world, including of Brazil, working with them in the G20, and also working with the G7 on the Hiroshima process. But let me tell you a key issue, and I will finish with this, of the recommendation that I think still place it as a gold standard. I have to say that, of course, it sounds that I'm UNESCO. Yes, I'm UNESCO. We always say there needs to be human determination when we do these technologies. The developer said, oh, but I don't know, because they are so complex. No, the machine, they gets a life of its own, and then it's very difficult to know why they conclude what they conclude. At the end, what the recommendation on the ethics of AI of UNESCO says is that you need to ban providing legal personality to AI developments, meaning responsibility should always lie with the developers, and you need to have liability regimes. These things, we can develop them globally because this is a narrative that was adopted in 2021, but at the end, they need to translate into something nationally. And this is where are we putting the focus, along with working with all of the other institutions in this table to get common answers to these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Okay, so we're going to shift focus because, in a sense, AI of concern has changed focus, right? So, Gary, it's been a year since ChatGPT was introduced, and okay, I'm sorry about that. So that led to a very different discussion, and we wanted to ask you, what were the turning points to this increased focus on risk and on safety, and then how can those risks be leveraged to get some form of international coordination to govern AI? Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And I usually thrive on disagreement in panels. I completely agree with essentially everything that everybody else said on the panels. So I can just sort of give some perspective maybe about why we're here. A year ago, ChatGPT came out. I think of it as like a laboratory experiment that got released a little bit prematurely. So let us not forget that we're still being sold a lot of promissory notes about what it might someday do. So, for example, Reid Hoffman said that within a few months, hallucinations would be solved. I think more realistically, Sam Altman said the other day it might take till 2030 or something like that. We're not actually that close to having this as a reliable technology, but now we have it as a deployed technology. So something that really should still be in the lab is out there in the wild. One of the reasons it should be in the lab is because it does so many different things, none of which we really understand. So literally every day or every week, we still see something new that's incredibly cool. Somebody finds a new prompt and gets something useful, and we see something that's absolutely bizarre. Somebody wrote the words poem, 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 poem the other day, and out came a bunch of private data. Like, nobody understands why that's happening. Right? Let's be realistic about it. So a few things have happened this year. One was this premature release of this technology, and not just to a few people, like in a limited trial where people were consenting or whatever. Like, the whole world was affected by it. So 100 million people signed up, but even the people that didn't sign up, it's like being in an experiment they didn't want to be part of, because there are, for example, probably political biases, we don't even know which, that are pervaded by these machines that are now part of society because people get their information from them. So one turning point was releasing ChatGPT itself. Another turning point for me that had a lot of effect on me personally was watching how Microsoft, which had positioned itself as a leader in responsible AI, suddenly kind of sensed money in the water and changed their stance, I think, in a number of different ways. The fact that they didn't pull Sydney from the market after that bizarre interview with Kevin Roose in the New York Times, and their CEO said they wanted to make Google dance, to me that was a wake-up call that the game had changed, and I think it changed the game for Google itself. That, I think, in turn led a bunch of us to sign this pause letter that was mentioned earlier today. And you can agree or disagree with the way it was constructed and so forth. Obviously, we were never actually going to get a pause, but 30,000 people signed, including a lot of prominent people, and it really did, I think, have the effect of waking up Washington and many other places in the world. And so that changed, I think, the tenor of the conversation quite a bit once that was signed. And then Sam was asked by Richard Blumenthal, and Blumenthal referred to it, but he left out my role in this. Blumenthal asked Sam, he said, what do you think's the worst risk? Is it jobs? And Sam said, no, it wasn't jobs. And I said to Blumenthal, you should ask Sam what it really is. And at that point, Sam said publicly that he was worried that this would be really detrimental to society. And I think the fact that Sam said that with an assist from me company to the public in the whole world really made a difference to a lot of people. It's like, here's the guy who's making it, and he's having this Oppenheimer moment in the Senate. Like, this is a big deal. So I think all of those things, kind of changed the nature of the conversation, and it should, because here's something that has not been mentioned today, or not mentioned many times. These systems are black boxes. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know. We have no way of constraining their safety. We have no way of proving guarantees. There are certain parts of computer science where we can prove within measurable limits that something is going to work under some assumptions. We have that when we design bridges and so forth. We don't have that for these systems. I think people are waking up to that.
So do you think they need some form of replicability?
Absolutely, these systems need replicability. I'm not sure that we will ever get them. There's a wonderful checklist on replicability by Joelle Pineau, who unfortunately went off to Meta and is not pushing this as hard as she was, but you can look up the replicability checklist, I think V3.0 or something like that on the web, and it gives very clear instructions about how to make sure that these systems are replicable. And I mean, that is part of the issue. They're incredibly unstable. They will not necessarily give you the same answer in May as they will in September. That makes it very hard to engineer. It makes it very hard to have any safety guarantees around it. So yes, the world should in fact be trying to figure out what we can do to constrain these things.
Thank you so much for that answer. Okay, so I'm going to ask the same question to everybody now, which is, considering the concerns with foundation models, what mechanisms can ensure safety thresholds around the globe? So Gabriela, let me start with you.
As it has been said, we don't know what we don't know. And therefore, the fact is that we need to learn together. The fact that we have these international organizations and the efforts that we are all doing help to try to understand better. I think that's a very important point. But you cannot say, I cannot do anything because I know the system and I don't know what the risks that they entail. I think that we need to focus on the rule of law. We need to focus on the capacities of governments to ensure that whenever there is harm, there is compensation, the liability regimes. I'm not talking about the technologies, I'm talking about the societies, I'm talking about the governments. And therefore, I think that the conversation had been too much centered on the technologies and how far we can control these technologies, instead of looking at how do I preserve what we have gained in our democratic countries to ensure that whenever there is harm, there are redressal mechanisms. I think this is really important. And that's why I'm very, I have a very positive view in the sense that stop law, because yes, our recommendations are not binding, neither the OECD nor mine, unless you go and negotiate a convention that will take years and then you don't know how you get there. Soft law helps in framing the discussion, in putting this emphasis. And I can tell you, I'm working with many countries, including Senegal, and I'm working with the Netherlands, looking at what kind of institutions you need. It's very dispersed. Ministries don't even know who is really in charge when things go wrong. So let's answer the governance question. Let's try to build this from ourselves. And then while we continue to try to understand these very impressive developments in the technological ladder. And by the way, I think that we need these international institutions to learn together. I have seen my countries when they get together and they exchange, they learn from each other and they feel relief because they know that somebody else is looking at the very same issues. In February 5 and 6, we're going to have the Global Forum on the Ethics of AI in Slovenia. All of you are invited. Amandeep will be there. The advisory body of the Secretary General will be there. Many ministers, the G20 will be there. I think we need to continue working together in an interoperable manner to really go for the solutions.
Thank you. Ulrik?
Yeah, I can beat Gary because we're now more than 20 minutes in, and I still haven't either heard anything I disagree with on the panel. So I'll try to see if I can be a bit more concrete to have somebody disagree with me on something. I think there are a couple of issues, Susan, where we might work together on something that's a bit more concrete. We did, as I said, the AI principles in 19. They were, let's be honest, so high level that the whole world could agree to them a few months later, not the whole world, G20. Now, I think we need to go beyond principles. Some of the issues, some of the concrete issues where we might agree on something in terms of safety would be, one, could we perhaps agree that every AI system should have an off switch somehow based on on agreed norms that could be easily translated into practice. I don't think that is beyond us. We could maybe also develop interoperable AI auditing and certification ecosystems. And we could perhaps also share, I know we could share international good practices and norms because we're already doing that at the OECD. Those are three areas where I think we could move in tandem. All the institutions that we've talked about, and certainly the institutions represented here today. Having said that, if I may, Susan, concerns are important, and it was, I agree with Gary, it was perhaps the April letter that really woke up regulators across the world. But we also have to be mindful of the potential, benefits from generative AI. I say that also as an economist. We delivered our economic outlook yesterday at the OECD, and though we are headed perhaps for a global soft landing, it's not as if we're seeing impressive growth numbers, perhaps except in Amandeep's home country, India. We're looking at growth, rates below 3% for the next couple of years. On top of that, most countries will be looking at increased spending because of aging demographics, increased climate spending. COP28 is going on as we speak. It's going to be costly, let's be honest. And I'm sorry to say that because of geopolitical tension, we might also see increased military spending. So what is the ray of light here if we look a decade down the world economy? Well, it might just be AI. It might just be the digital transformation. And there I agree very much with Amandeep. If the digital transformation, if AI is going to be the engine for the world economy this decade, we need to make absolutely sure that we don't create new divides, we don't create a digital divide, that we don't give the digital transformation a bad name like we perhaps gave globalization a bad name a couple of decades ago. That was actually a pity because that was another engine for economic growth and well-being and welfare that was given a bad name because we didn't distribute the benefits evenly. We have to make damn sure, I can't say that or lie, we have to be absolutely sure that if all these economic promises are kept from the digital transformation, that we do not create new divides, that is within countries and between countries.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, Prandeep, you're next.
You're having a great panel when you see that the OECD speaks like the UN and the UN speaks like the OECD. I think to answer your question, there is the engineering side of it. I see that there's a lot of emphasis on engineered solutions, and some of them are obvious. Good engineering happens that way. You have to take care of cybersecurity. You have to do testing. You have to have benchmarks and evaluations, all of that. Now, that shouldn't be sold as novel responses to greater challenges. That is the baseline that you have to do in any case. I think what we need going beyond safety and good engineering practices is a broader notion of public interest, going beyond safety and protection against harm. And that broader notion of public interest needs to have human rights, sustainability, inclusion in terms of the economic opportunity, competitive markets. If this is going to lead to more concentration of economic wealth and tech power in a few hands, is that desirable from a public interest point of view? So we need to think beyond safety and harms. And this is why this is a conversation that cannot be left to just the tech community. It has to involve a broader set of stakeholders, civil society, ethicists, people who think about societal impact, cultural issues, diversity issues. And that's why we need more transparency about tech's development and its impact.
Thank you for that answer, and that's why we're going to, as soon as Gary's done, we're going to open it up to some audience questions. So Gary.
I'll just amplify one point and clarify another, I guess. So Amandeep made points about networking and also about bringing in civil society. I think something we have to remember is there isn't going to be a single magic bullet here because there are actually many different risks. You have a technology that can be used in many different ways, none of which are well understood. It's inevitable that we're going to need multiple layers of oversight. We need that even for airplanes, right? We have oversight in how we design them, how they get built, how they get serviced, how they get used, and so forth. We have multiple layers of oversight in multiple agencies. We're obviously going to need that for AI, where it's not even just one product of moving somebody from point A to point B, but many products, many ways in which bad actors can use those products and so forth. So of course we're going to need to have that kind of network notion that I think actually maybe we've all brought up in different ways. And that also demands, for example, that you have representatives from civil society. Some people are going to see things that other people don't. They're going to see risks that other people don't. And so, echoing one of the comments from earlier today, if this technology is supposed to serve society, that means we need representatives from the global south at every meeting and not just as an afterthought. So I'm absolutely with everybody on that. And I just want to make one other point, which is that there are forces in Silicon Valley that are trying to make it sound like regulation inherently stifles innovation. And this is tying a little bit in with something that Ulrika said, which is people are kind of imagining we can't have the positive economic gains and have regulation. Of course, that's not true. So there are plenty of times in history where regulation has actually improved the product, like airlines, right? We have safer airlines that people are actually willing to get on because there was regulation built around them. And so there's this myth that, it's all going to be bad and terrible. It's going to stop anybody from participating. That's silly. And let's not forget that these companies are doing training runs, test runs they don't even use that cost tens of millions of dollars. If you have a certification process that costs $1 million, that's not going to discourage them. You can have lesser costs of certification for things that are less risky. I mean, they could be as minimal as driver's licenses, just so we can keep track of who's doing what. So there's a lot of kind of like straw manning out there, like nobody's possibly going to be able to afford this except for Google. And actually, most of the players that are going to be able to do this will be able to afford it. It's going to be a tiny part of the expense for what they do. And it's going to push people to build better technologies that actually are responsive to safety, transparency, accountability that we should all want. So let's not give up on regulation just because it costs a little money.
And in fact, the OECD has written countless books about how you can protect people from harm and facilitate innovation. Okay, we have probably 8 minutes or so for questions, so let's get to them. We didn't talk about open source AI. Who's got a question? Okay, please.
Hi, thank you, everyone. So my name is Ariel. I'm co-leading with the Global Partnership on AI, a project called SAFE, Safety and Assurance of Generative AI, obviously in close coordination with OECD and UNESCO. I want to ask you a question, maybe to you, Amandeep and Gabriela. How can we make sure that we collaborate, these two superpower of AI, the US and China, can collaborate together? Obviously, we got positive sign with Bletchley Park, China being invited there and doing President Xi visit, also this being in discussion. How can we make sure that there are true mechanisms that look at solutions toward AI safety?
That was a question we asked earlier, but okay. So you want to take that?
And then you can take
You want to take that while she's, oh, okay.
hello, I'm Dr. Gonzalez, Johns Hopkins and private sector. I just have a curious question because everybody calls that ChatGPT has hallucinations. I think the word is wrong because hallucination is a state of the mind. It's human. So why people are always anthropomorphizing AI? And I asked to Yuri because you are a cognitive science, a psychologist, and that's not the right word for that. Can you explain why?
Yeah, please.
Do I still have a live mic? I hate the term. I partly popularized it. I tried to push people towards confabulation. It's very difficult to talk about these things without anthropomorphizing. A more accurate thing to say would be there's statistical models that are not bound in facts, and some of the things that they say still land on the facts because of the way in which they're parasitic on humans, but some of them are bizarre. And we're sort of stuck with this term right now. It's true that it's not really an accurate representation, and it's true that we should not be anthropomorphizing them. So I feel bad for the role in which I've had of pushing that term forward. I wish, we could at least use confabulation. I think we're stuck with it now.
Anyone else on the panel want to address that question, hallucination?
I think the broader point about not anthropomorphizing is very, very important. You see that even in the new Chinese regulation, because this leads us down a path of delusion. It is good for some companies, they can hype up things, but I think it's, societally speaking, it is toxic.
And the other question was about international collaboration on safety. Do you anyone want to address that?
Well, I might chip in because I think it's a non-brainer to have collaboration. I think that the UK got it right to bring the US and China together. I have to say that that's why we were really pleased when the US decided to come back to UNESCO, because the recommendation was also signed by China. And actually, the recommendation has these two important provisions of forbidding mass surveillance and social scoring. So while we talk about generative AI and all these major trends that are now taking the attention of everybody, let's not forget the other misuse that can really be harmful for people day-to-day lives. I think they need to be together. And actually, because China and the US are the major producers of these technologies, so the more we can build a system where there is exchange of information, where there is a better understanding of what the others are doing. As Amandeep mentioned, China has enacted decisions that go pretty much in line with the European Union or with the US, but because we don't have this conversation, we cannot just sit and see how much we are addressing the issues. So we are all for this collaboration and to put people at the center, because I think this is the most important element in the discussion.
I'll just add a little if I can, which is there's no doubt that each country wants its own thing here and there's some differences, but no country wants to give up the control of information completely to outside actors. And no country should want to give up its own sovereignty to some people in Silicon Valley that can't even run themselves. So there's actually, I think, plenty of common ground by which we can get not full agreement, but partial agreement on some substantial things that protect us all.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for two more short questions. So, in the pink.
Jody Lobana from Queen's University, Canada. So my question is that international organizations are doing a lot to come together and start to put some sort of international regulations in place if we can. But some things like GPT-4 and now GPT-5 potentially coming within next year or so, things may start to get out of hand quickly. So do we have something in place from safety perspective internationally that we can quickly act if, let's say, auto agents start to take over our internet? And as internationally, we have to act quickly. So I think it's a two-pronged things we need to do. Yes, we work on things that may be enacted over next few years, but what if something happens within next couple of years? Are we ready for it?
Thank you for that question. One more.
Sorry. I'm just, I'll sell it to you. So I just wanted to make a note, so I'm an AI professor for those of you who don't know, like going way back. Hallucination is a standard term in AI, in machine learning specifically. It's a term that we used going way back, even before neural nets, for filling in the missing data. If you have partial data, and this predates any of the popular conversation now, words, I'm in natural language processing. Words have multiple senses. Every word has different different senses in different technical communities. And I think it is important to understand when people are talking about hallucination in a machine learning sense and when people are talking about hallucination in a psychological sense. No one community dominates that, and that's true for most of the words in our vocabulary. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you for that. Okay, ask your question quickly.
Okay, quick question. Marko Grobelnik from Josef Stefan Institute, also closely collaborating with OECD and one of the contributors of this OECD AI Policy Observatory, right? Which tries to observe, right, AI as it happens and also sneak into the future. So the question is the following. So far, if we talk about LLMs and pretty much everything what we discussed now, ChatGPT and so on, this is a discussion about the present and the recent past, right? In a year from now, Gary will talk about another type of AI here, right? In 2 years, will be either even different, right? So, so today we need to prepare for this near future, which will be in a year or two from now. How are, let's say, UN and others being prepared for policy decisions on much harder questions as today? Today we have, okay, black box, but pretty much single black box which we can interrogate. In the future there will be way more black boxes and many other things which we need to discuss, right? So this would be the question.
Maybe very quickly, I think it's this question is similar to the one that you asked. The first thing we need is a neutral scanning capacity we can all trust. That pools scientific expertise from around the world, different perspectives, as Gary pointed out, and tells us this is what's happening. Because we don't know. People tell us things, but they tell it from their own perspective, with their own interests in mind. So we need to stand that up internationally as quickly as possible. And then, I'm sure there's no danger of AI taking over the internet, but I think we need to have some kind of a rapid response capacity to respond to incidents, to respond to points of failure. And some countries may actually need assistance in tackling some of those issues, just as we have in the cybersecurity space. So these are just two examples of functionalities that we need to stand up over a horizon of probably 9 to 18 months. They may be more, but these are just examples.
Okay, I have to apologize. We have to end now, but you can try to corner our esteemed panelists. Please join me in thanking them, and thank you so much for attending this conference. Have a great day, everybody.